Cool.
Well done.
Megan Burns is also receiving a 5-year.
So Megan is our administrative boundaries team lead, but she's so much more than that, and as a result, I had to kind of make a list of things. Otherwise, we've forgotten something. Foremost, when we went through the risks, Megan took on the challenge of figuring out the cadastral workflow. And even though we originally talked about trading on and off, her and I actually doing some of the monthly updates every month except one of those, since we resumed that, Megan has done. So that's a huge thing for the library because it's one of our most prominent layers that we work on. She also works on public lands, CAD and STI adjustments, managed areas. She works with other state agencies, including OPI, DPHHS, and others. She works on NRCS contract work, which is a huge deal for the library as well. She's our Census Bureau point of contact, works on a lot of different projects there, including BASS, School District Review Program, and she helped out a lot with LUCA. Megan is always looking at existing stuff within the library and just trying to figure out better ways to do things. As a result, she works on a lot of the applications, including Data List, the Digital Atlas, and her ArcGIS Online presence. She's also one of our key people that are just getting out and doing trainings and presentations. She's done outreach to the conservation districts, to other state agencies, watershed coordination groups. She's extremely active in media, so much so she got an award for their Distinguished Service Award in 2018. She was also a Governor's Award recipient in 2016 for some water supply work. She's gotten many thank yous from different local governments, just as people call in looking for answers and help with things. Megan's one of the key points of contact. She also works with legislative services and recently got a thank you from someone from there. Overall, Megan's positive attitude and initiative to just take on new things and constantly trying to improve stuff around the library has been a huge asset, and we don't know where it would be without her. So, thank you.
So Pam Henley is one of our statewide consulting librarians, and she serves Sagebrush and South Central libraries. And one of the new librarians kind of said Pam was absolutely instrumental in helping me know where to focus my energies. She's a listening ear. She's also very calm and has a great sense of humor. In library development, we often know we can just reach out to Pam and just say, can you help out in this moment? And she always steps up. She does so very gracefully. But the accomplishment I'm going to choose to highlight also came about because of the budget cuts. And with the loss of the data coordinator, we had no one to do the public library statistics. And I asked Pam, having no idea what I was roping her into. And she probably had no idea, or she might have said no. But she did it, and she did it without nearly the support she should have had. And this year is her second year, and I think it's gone a lot more smoothly. And so I asked Jenny if it would be okay to give Pam this. Pam received the Keppel Award from the Institute of Museum and Library Services for her work on the public library statistics.
Sweet. Nice.
I'm always so happy to hear the great things happening at the library. Thank you guys so much. We'll go on to approve the minutes. And do we need to look at the executive order?
Yeah.
Executive session.
Yeah, so you should all have copies of the executive session minutes from the February executive session. We need to approve those, and then, as per state law, we collect those and hold on to a copy should they ever be requested through a records request.
I move that we approve the minutes from the executive session on February 13th.
Thank you, Bruce.
And I'll second.
Thank you, Elsie. If you can pass those down.
Did we?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Bruce. Is there any discussion about them? No? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it's passed. Thank you, Bruce.
Welcome. Seldom I would ever catch something like that.
All right, and we'll move on to the regular minutes. Did everyone get a chance to read those?
I move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Jane. Any discussion about the minutes from February 13th? All those in favor? Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's passed. And so we're going to move on to the full severance tax revenue estimating process.
We'll come back to the legislative update after.
It's been an interesting situation.
You want me to stand here or?
There's
Okay.
great, is that your PowerPoint's there, I just had to shut it off.
Okay.
And Commission, I don't know if you want to turn around or move into the audience, whatever you're comfortable with.
So I'll just introduce Chris really quickly. He's a former coworker of mine. He is a revenue analyst at the governor's budget office, and I'm so happy that he was able to come today to discuss how he estimates coal revenues. Please go.
Excellent.
Checking my slides to make sure. Sure it's not showing up. Sure why. It's not useful. That's not a very useful chart.
We can use our imaginations.
Sorry about that.
Is it pulled from a spreadsheet? Are the data pulled from a spreadsheet?
Yeah, it must be.
In a separate place.
Yep. So.
Been there, done that.
So much for that cloud thing.
All right, so I'm just going to talk a bit about coal severance tax in Montana. Kind of a general overview of the coal industry in Montana and the collection and distribution of severance taxes and then potential risks to the forward-looking outlook, which is going to be less informative now that I don't have charts. So Montana's mines are primarily in the Powder River Basin, except for a small mine near Sidney, Montana, which produces very little and lower quality coal. But the coal produced from the Powder River Basin is subbituminous coal, and it has a lower heat content than most coal produced in other U.S. basins in the eastern and central parts of the country, but it is much cleaner to its lower sulfur content, so that makes it more attractive for meeting emissions regulations and that kind of thing. Montana has the largest coal reserves in the country, estimated at over 100 billion tons, but annual coal production is only about 40 million tons, and lately it's been a little bit less than that due to some declining demand domestically and both internationally.
So I apologize.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you
Fire away
define
questions.
lately, what time period lately is,
So the
and
past,
less quantified?
sure. So the past couple of years, output, I got some tables a little bit later, but output's been about 35 million tons for the past maybe 2-3 years, fiscal years. Before that, it averaged 40. So, any questions anytime, just fire away. So Montana's coal mines are 6 major ones, 5 of which are subject to the state severance tax. The Absaloka mine on the Crow Reservation does not pay state severance tax. Spring Creek mine, Bighorn County, is the state's largest producer. Historically, it's been about 16 to 17 million tons, but last few fiscal years, about 12 million. And that is mostly due to reduced export volumes. The Bull Mountain mine, Muscle Shell County, is Montana's only underground mine, so it's taxed at a little bit lower rate. Produces about 5 to 8 million tons. There's potential there for maybe expansion in the future. It could double output, but there's no specific timeline for that. And then the Rosebud mine is the one right next to the coal strip generating station. Produces 8 to 9 million tons a year and supplies 90+% of its coal straight to the power plant via conveyor belt. Montana coal is shipped both domestically and to foreign consumers. Montana, Michigan, and Minnesota are the primary consumers of Montana-produced coal. Coal strip power plant produces or consumes most of the in-state coal consumption, and Michigan and Minnesota receive the largest share of the domestic shipments. And then foreign exports are shipped out of a terminal in Canada, and they mostly go to Asia, to specific countries, China, South Korea, that kind of thing, but it's not very good data on that. So severance tax rates, most of Montana's coal is taxed at that 15% rate. It's comes out with heat content of about 8,000 BTUs per pound, and it's from surface mines. So 15%, and then the Bull Mountain mine, like I mentioned, is an underground mine, so it's taxed at 4%. And then, so the severance tax is calculated on what is referred to as a contract sales price, which is different than the gross. It includes exemptions that Montana allows when calculating severance tax revenue. So these include kind of a slew of little state and federal taxes like resource indemnity taxes, coal gross proceeds, property taxes, and some federal black lung tax and things like that. And then there's also companies get deductions for the cost of washing the coal to prepare for shipment. So I've got some information on that. So like I mentioned, 6 major mines, 5 are surface mines, 1 underground mine. So here's kind of a little bit of a history of production from all mines and then production from the taxable mines. So all mines includes the Absaloka mine on the Crow Indian Reservation, and taxable mines, I do not include that. And that's mostly what I'll be talking about from here on out is production and from those taxable mines, because that's what generates the severance tax revenue. So you can see production has dropped off a little bit starting in 2016. That's when international thermal coal prices tumbled pretty well, so that took away a lot of export volumes. And there's been quite a bit of retirements of domestic coal generating stations, so domestic demand has fallen a little bit as well. Export volumes came back in 2018, so that's why you see the uptick back to about 34 million tons of production from taxable mines. And then prices steadily increase. And then severance tax revenue, so the range is usually from 40 million to 60 million. It's kind of the floor and ceiling there, and it varies quite a bit in that range. Lately, it's been around that $60 million mark.
I missed what you said about what tumbled in 2013?
Oh, so in 2016, international coal prices. So that determines the viability of Montana's exports.
But it looks there like the prices have only increased.
So these are, these are just domestic prices, or prices at the mine mouth. So when the coal is put on the train for shipment, these are the prices that they pay and then are received, and then they have to account for transportation costs and those kinds of things. So they receive, we're unsure what prices they receive on the international market because that data is not.
And have those international prices stayed low since 2016?
They've ticked back up lately, so that's why we've seen an uptick in production and severance tax revenues in 2018. And those prices are, the benchmark price for that is at Australia Port Newcastle. So Montana coal mostly goes to the Asian markets, kind of in the Pacific. And so they compete with Chinese producers and Indian producers in Indonesia and those kinds of countries.
Do you have any idea of what percentage of the coal production goes to non-energy production purposes?
Very little. Most of it,
almost 100%.
all thermal burned in. Steam power plants for electricity, yeah, that's correct. Okay, so here's the current distribution of coal severance tax revenues. So, kind of like I laid out earlier, you get production times price, gross revenue, subtract the exemptions, you get taxable revenue, and then you apply the tax rate based on your surface mine with certain heat content, and then that's your severance tax revenue. So 50% is distributed to the Coal Trust Fund, and 50% is distributed to various state special revenue funds and the general fund. So the state library used to be part of the coal shared account, and now you guys have your own fund, which I think was put in place last session. So those rates there on the left, you will see, those are the percentages of total coal severance tax revenue that the library will receive in 2021 and beyond. So it's, these distributions change a lot, especially the distributions to the Coal Trust Fund, but those don't necessarily affect library revenues. So. So now, I will send you a PowerPoint with charts that are actually in there. So I apologize for this. So year-to-date production through February of fiscal 2019, coal production is about 4% lower than what we saw through February of 2018. And it had been trending higher year-to-date until the last couple of months when we've seen some significant drops in production, particularly in February. And it's unclear exactly why that is. It was at the Bull Mountain mine, which historically they sometimes have to move some of their underground mining equipment around, so they have to shut down operations for a month or so. So it could be just related to that, which is kind of my hunch. So in terms of actual severance tax collections, they're about 4% higher in fiscal 19 through February than they were last year. That's 7.8 million compared to 7.5. But severance tax collections are lagged by about a quarter. So the companies have a certain time period after the due date, after the quarter ends, to report their taxes to the Department of Revenue, and then they have another month or so to distribute the revenue. So, well, potentially, given the declines in production over the past couple of months, we may start to see a little bit of an erosion in severance tax collections on a year-to-date comparison basis. So let's just try it here. So year-to-date production is about 22.5 million tons, and last year
timed
It
presentation.
did that earlier.
Any,
Just can't take them anywhere, can you?
Coal fire plant shut down.
Is there any sort of discernible cycle in production or revenue when you look back X number of years?
Not particularly.
None that you've been able to price out?
Yeah. Sometimes it's kind of hard to know exactly why production may be up or down in a year. Sometimes it can be related to the amount of coal stocks that are sitting at electrical generators across the country. So if they have a good stockpile, then their demand might be lower in a year because of that. And severance tax revenue is affected by factors other than just prices and production. So more big audit payments sometimes, penalty and interest from prior late taxes and the Department of Revenue. The way that they do revenue collections is they accrue fourth quarter revenues. And so they estimate basically fourth quarter revenues every year, and those are subject to error as well. So.
Have you been able to notice any effect of a particularly cold winter or warm summer on coal production?
Yes. I don't have any specifics of how that relationship works, but that's definitely a factor. Whenever you have a season, particularly high electrical demand, that may produce those coal stockpiles, and then a couple of quarters later you see an increase in shipments to rebuild those.
But it's a lagging pattern.
Usually,
It lags the event.
Yep.
Thank
And
you.
then spikes in natural gas prices also can do that as well. Lots of volatile factors involved is the short answer there. So these are some projections from the current legislative revenue estimate in House Joint Resolution 2. So you can see the blue numbers there, the projection. So you see kind of a relatively stable production through fiscal 2022, and then see a decline in fiscal 2023 related to the shutdown of a couple of coal strips, older generators, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Prices generally increasing about $1 per ton, and severance tax revenue relatively stable, around 56, 57 million until you get to fiscal 2023 when you see the revenue impacts of.
Why are prices forecast to trend upward when worldwide demand is declining?
Sure. So these aren't necessarily my projections, but I agree with them, and you can just see historically prices generally increase, and so we just kind of see that trend and project that forward. And international prices don't necessarily have an effect on the prices that you see here in Montana. How that plays in is that it makes the shipments uneconomic because of transportation costs and those kinds of things. So, projections for natural gas prices are fairly stable, as well as long-term projections for coal prices from other federal forecasting or energy agencies.
5% increase.
So it's not a rapid increase,
Yeah.
but it's still a general rise, and that may turn out to be wrong, depending on how things play out in the market. And then, so given those numbers, the distributions to the library is about $500,000 per year. So I think I mentioned this already. Collections are affected by factors other than the price of production. So Now I'll talk a little bit about the risks associated with the long-term projections. So we have the uncertainty regarding the future of Colstrip Power Plant and the associated Rosebud mine. And then, changing economics in the domestic coal market, and then international exports. So Colstrip, I'm sure you've seen all the articles that are scattered about in the news and stuff about this generating station. It's a large generating station, one of the largest in the country. Total capacity is about 2 gigawatts, which is significant. And so the two older generators, which are the two kind of teal colored buildings there, are about 307 megawatts each, represent about 30% of the station's generating capacity. And those are scheduled to shut down no later than July 1st, 2022 as a result of a lawsuit with the Montana Department of Information Center about emissions, pollution, thing. So units 3 and 4 don't currently have a timeline for closure. They're newer units, cleaner burning, about 740 megawatts each. So if or when units 1 and 2 shut down, is unclear what will happen with the current Rosebud production that is dedicated to those units. If they will be able to find another buyer, if they have the takeaway capacity to do so. So there's some questions surrounding that. You can kind of see in the picture there's conveyor belts running kind of all over the place from the mine to the generating station. And that's how the coal gets in there. So I don't know what their rail network is like and how they're connected to the main lines that are taking exports to the west coast and tax shipments to the east. So if we do see a reduction in Rosebud production, we will see a reduction in surface tax collections, which was reflected in those long-term projections. So a rather recent development, the company that owns the Rosebud mine, as well as a couple others in Montana, filed for bankruptcy in October 2018. And their creditors took over the company in March recently. And there's been some disputes with the Colstrip station regarding the current supply contract and the prices associated with the coal. The mine wants a higher price for their coal, and the generating station doesn't necessarily want to agree to that. So it sounds like the current contract will be honored through 2019, and then after that, we're not really sure what's going to happen. For now, we're just assuming things are going to continue to operate as they have. But there's been some mention that Colstrip is maybe putting some feelers out to see if there could be a potential new supply source for them if the Rosebud mine ceases to supply them. And probably a complicating factor with that is the Colstrip station was built specifically to burn Rosebud coal. So the different characteristics of the coal from other mines or basins will play into that decision, I'm sure. And Westmoreland also owns the Savage mine, which is up near Sydney, and that mine supplies to the Lewis and Clark generating station, which is owned by Montana Dakota Utilities. And that is a relatively small generator, but it also still faces an uncertain future and will likely be shut down sooner rather than later. And Westmoreland also owns the Absolute mine on the Pro Reservation. Okay, so now I'm going to have to try and tell you what those charts are supposed to look like. So the first one was showing electric power. Sector coal consumption has been declining since 2007. And in 2018, it was the lowest that it's been since 1979. So that's a trend that's reflective of significant retirements of older, dirtier coal generators in the country. So about, the EIA, the U.S. U.S. Energy Information Administration has all sorts of information on this stuff, and they have projections and things, and since 2007, over 70 gigawatts worth of coal-fired capacity in the United States is shut down. That's quite a bit. About one gigawatt is enough to supply power to about 300,000 to 400,000 homes. So there's additional retirements planned for 2019, an additional 4 or 5 gigawatts. Mostly these coal plants are in the eastern, central, and eastern part of the country. And so part of that was spurred by the stricter emissions regulations, so the mercury and air toxic standards tightened emissions regulations on these coal plants and made it too costly for a lot of them to comply with the new standards, so they chose to shut down instead of adding scrubbers or whatever they could to reduce air pollution. And lower natural gas prices have also eaten into coal's competitiveness in the electric market. So U.S. natural gas production rising rapidly since 2005, kind of with the onset of all the shale plays that have popped up across the country. Big gas shale plays in the eastern part of the country. The oil Bakken plays here in Montana and North Dakota specifically produce a lot of associated gas with oil production, which can be captured and sent to market, and as well as Texas has big oil and gas plays as well. So that's contributed to significant increases in U.S. gas production, large storage volumes, and declining prices generally. And coal is still priced lower on a dollars per kind of BTU basis, but natural gas has closed the gap considerably. And taking into the costs of complying with emission standards, coal is becoming a lot less competitive. And renewable energy sources have been declining in costs as well, helped along by subsidies, credits, and increasing and improving storage technology for wind and solar resources. So in 2016, natural gas overtook coal as the primary fuel source for electrical generation in the U.S. And it doesn't look like that's going to change now. Long-term projections show the share of electricity generated from natural gas continue to increase, coal will continue to decrease, and eventually the share of electricity from renewables will overtake coal production as well. These are all projections from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So in there, every year, that AEO stands for the Annual Energy Outlook, which is produced in January each year by that federal agency. And it's a lengthy document, and they have projections and scenarios for all sorts of components of the U.S. energy market. And their general view on coal is kind of a slow, steady decline. So roughly 2/3 of Montana's coal is shipped to domestic consumers. And so further retirements could potentially reduce the demand domestically for Montana's coal. Although the more stringent air emission standards does help Montana a little bit because it's cleaner burning coal, and so produces less sulfur dioxide emissions, which have been a big deal lately. So that makes it more competitive, even though it's lower heat content, more competitive on a clean coal type basis than production from the Appalachian region, the Illinois Basin region. So any potential erosion in domestic demand for Montana coal could be mitigated by increased exports. So, like I mentioned, international thermal coal prices are very important in determining the viability of Montana's exports. They're highly volatile. They can spike way up to over $100 a ton and drop right back down to under $60, $50 a ton. Montana coal generally seems to be competitive when those international prices are above the $60 a ton range. It depends on what Montana coal is priced kind of against a couple of different benchmarks. One is that Australia benchmark I mentioned, and another is a benchmark used for coal produced out of India, which is more similar to, or that is the price index that the Spring Creek mine kind of prices against to determine if they can export or not. That data is not really available, but the Australia benchmark is a good indicator of where international prices are headed. But Chinese demand is and has been a large factor on the U.S. or the international coal market, but their appetite for coal is kind of leveling off, and their electricity generated from natural gas renewables and that kind of thing is starting to creep up as well. So that will impact the international markets moving forward. There is growing demand in India as that country develops further, so there could be potential market there, potential markets in South Korea. The EIA estimates leveling of Chinese coal consumption, as I mentioned there. In their annual energy outlook, they're not projecting U.S. coal exports to increase, kind of to stay flat. Major international markets are distant from the U.S. They're in Asia and Europe mostly. And in those markets, there's a lot of folks, producers in Australia, China, India, Indonesia. So Montana is a marginal supplier in the international market. When there's a high demand, Montana can supply that additional margin when prices are high, but usually they're not as competitive as other international producers. This is just a chart of Montana coal exports. They kind of ramped up from 2008 to 2012, 2013, and then as international prices kind of took the same trend, there was a big drop in international prices from 2013 to 2016, from well over $100 a ton to under 60, and Montana coal exports declined pretty rapidly in response to that. Spring Creek Mine and Bull Mountain Mine are Montana's primary exporters. Bull Mountain Mine exports almost all of its production, which is about 5 to 8 million tons. Like I said, there are significant transportation costs incurred for Montana producers. They have to ship by rail all the way up to British Columbia, and then from there by barge over to the Asian Pacific markets. So sometimes the costs associated with transportation are equal to or greater than the price that the company receives at the mine mouth. And you have the environmental concerns in Washington and Oregon about coal shipments going through those states and causing air and water pollution and those kinds of things. And residents in those states want to move away from coal-fired electrical generation in their portfolios. One company had proposed a large coal export terminal on the Columbia River in Longview, Washington, I believe, and the state rejected a key water quality permit that the terminal needed. So for now, that terminal is not going to be built, and there's been a few others proposed as well that probably will suffer the same fate. So for now, Montana coal goes up to the West Shore Terminal in British Columbia, Canada, which is a long ways away.
Question.
Yep.
Are there costs to cross the border into Canada? Increased costs?
That I'm not sure. So one thing that kind of complicates Montana's coal exports in terms of knowing the prices and where they go is the mine companies will sell volumes to brokers, and once that occurs, you don't really know where they end up. You know, they're being exported most likely to Asia, but you don't know, the prices they're receiving from those buyers, and they're going to South Korea or China or that kind of thing. So generally know how much coal is being exported out of Montana, but we don't necessarily know where it's ending up. So that's a challenge to kind of understanding some of the economics of the shipments, but just looking at the relationship between export volumes and international prices, you can tell that they're highly linked.
This is really helpful. Thank you for doing this. No, don't apologize. So it looks to me like there are a number of factors which are basically causing coal production and hence severance taxes collected to decline. And I don't know if that line ever crosses the zero mark. I assume it doesn't, but I assume it dips down significantly. These revenues to the state library significantly support public library services and library services generally throughout the state. It's not a huge chunk of money, but it's significant for us since we're small players.
Right.
So thinking about basically if this sort of prop disappearing or shortening over a certain amount of time, not as a policy matter, not as a kind of a hard data matter, what does your gut tell you that we should expect? Are we looking at we've got sort of 10 years to find different revenues, 20 years? What's that cycle?
I think barring any crazy, unforeseen, sudden shutdown of coal strip, I think it's going to be kind of a slow bleed down. The end of coal or whatever, however you want to call it, has been kind of been talked about for a while, but Montana coal severance tax collections are still coming along. They're pretty stable, so I think it's just going to be over 10, 20 years of slow decline as more plants shut down in the United States and international appetites for coal kind of ease and cool a little bit.
So we should be looking at somewhere around a decade, sort of planning horizon, long term, to figure out what comes next.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Knowing the risk of coal strip, for sure. Yep.
Does Montana have a similar severance tax for gas and oil production in the state?
It's a little bit lower. So Montana has an oil and gas production holiday. I don't know if you're familiar with that. First 18 months.
180 days?
Yep, first 18 months for horizontal production, first 12 months for vertical production. Unfortunately, with the way that Bakken wells are, a significant amount of their production occurs within the first year and a half.
So why isn't that being changed? I mean, it's fracking, right? Is it just there is an out?
There's been legislation each session, but it's a tax increase. It's generally not approved. But the tax rate on oil and gas for primary recovery production is roughly 10%, 9.5%, 10%. But then there's all sorts of lower rates for what is called strip oil production, which is very low volumes. There's price triggers, and so it's kind of complicated. But the main tax rate for oil and gas is about 9.5%. So the severance tax on coal is a little bit higher. And oil and gas taxes bring in lately about $100 million a year in total.
100 million a year. And this is 53?
40, yeah, 50 to 60 generally. Oil and gas taxes go to local governments and other state special revenue funds in the general fund as well.
So is there a reason why the state library doesn't get anything from that?
From oil and gas?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. I don't know if there's ever been a distribution from oil and gas to the library. I don't think there has been. It's always been from coal. So further information, if you want more, there's a bunch on the U.S. Energy Information Administration's website. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality, they every so often they produce a report called Understanding Energy in Montana. They have a 2018 update, and they go, they have sections on coal, natural gas, oil, and they have a lot of detail and history about those industries in Montana. So it's a I find it to be a very useful resource. And then Montana Department of Revenue every 2 years has their biennial report. And so they have, if you're interested in the history of coal severance tax revenues, they have that back to, when it used to be a % per ton tax, and all the changes that have been made. There have been many leading up to now, as well as historical tax collections and those kinds of things. So those are kind of the resources that I use most often. And then just, looking around on the internet for news articles and things when you're curious about what's going on with Coal Stream. And my contact info is down there. So feel free to give me a call or email or whatever. If you have any questions, and I will send you someone that can forward along to you a slide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jenny, I have a question, and I don't know if Chris can answer that. That's coming off of what Bruce had said. So long-term plan, any kind of maintain where we have with the coal severance. Do we have anything that we planned as a commission? Has the governor's office given us any direction? I know this is crystal ball, but they are trending because of oil and gas prices, and especially gas. So do we have a long-term plan?
The short answer is no. You know that the legislature is constantly looking at the future of coal and what that means for the overall state budget, because so much is tied to coal. And nobody's coming up with any kind of magical solutions. As the state looks at different kinds of revenue alternatives, then certainly we need to be in those conversations because we are one of those agencies that do rely on coal. To Ken's question, there's never been legislation for oil and gas or other kinds of revenue sources. And unless there's a significant revenue increase, then to try to get some of those other types of revenue means that you're taking from a current recipient, and that's never politically popular. There's been discussion in the past about doing away with all of the state special revenue accounts and just having all of this revenue flow into the general fund and letting agencies fight it out over the general fund. So, who knows if that's the idea. We'll talk a little bit later about House Bill 633, and I think that's the best strategy moving forward to look at alternative revenue sources, not just for general fund, but to recognize the volatility of coal. And the other thing I was going to say is that we're going to talk in a little while about Finance Committee and wanting to have better cash management practices for revenue accounts like this. And I think part of the process for that committee will be getting regular revenue updates when we're projecting out our budget for those monies and start helping us figure out when those monies start to trend down, what we need to do. So I think there are opportunities, but certainly nothing definite at this point.
Well, thank you, Aaron and Jenny, for this opportunity to get this briefing. This is extraordinarily helpful, and I think it's exactly what we need to be thinking about. Not that there's an easy answer, but this is good for us to be thinking about.
Yes. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you being here.
That's good.
Depends on where you're from. I know it. Yeah. Yeah.
Better.
Tracy, what are you doing next? Okay.
You want me to send you that?
You just want to hold the winters in Minnesota.
No. No. Unless it would be helpful. In which case, fine.
So we're going to move on with the agenda. We're
Sorry.
skipping around
No
the
worries.
end, down to the Montana Shared Catalog member application moratorium. So
So I did bring to the commission in December a suggestion that we put a moratorium on adding new libraries to the shared catalog. And just as a reminder, we've kind of been beyond capacity with the staff that we have for quite some time. And the only variable I could control in that is really adding new libraries. And so I had suggested that we had finally reached the point where we needed to find a strategy for adding additional staff. Around the nation and the world, consortium of the size of the shared catalog generally have 15 to 20 staff, and we have 4. And so that gives you kind of a sense of the workload that they are facing. So you granted that moratorium, for which I was grateful, and then I worked with Jenny and the MSC staff, and we approached Superintendent Arntzen to ask about a possible partnership pilot project to add a system admin dedicated to our school libraries. We have about 68 school libraries in the shared catalog. The shared catalog has 180 libraries total, so that kind of gives you a sense of where we're at. Superintendent Arntzen was open to the idea, with the idea of it being 2 years and then creating an EPP for the 2021 legislative session to possibly add a permanent full-time system admin dedicated to this process. And we've been meeting with her and talking to her regularly, especially focusing, I think, on success metrics that are, we hope, win-win for both of us as well. And so that is kind of where we are in the process. Commissioner Newell had asked if he could put this on the agenda to just kind of discuss it and see where we are. And so I don't know if you have some particular questions or comments for me at this point, or I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, I had a really interesting meeting with Commissioner Arntzen and the state librarian early. When was that? This week? Last week? Last Friday. It's been quite a week already, and we talked about this, and what I brought away from the meeting was a feeling of encouragement that the Office of Public Instruction was very much interested in partnering with the state library on this. At least that was my impression, and Superintendent, please speak to that, please. The other thing I thought that was really as fascinating as sort of this problem of having properly resourcing the shared catalog was the superintendent suggested that reading levels might be a measure of libraries' success. I'm really always interested in focusing libraries on user outcomes, and whether people in a town or in a school, or for that matter in a town, have advanced or diminished reading abilities based on something that library is doing or not doing, strikes me as a really interesting thing to follow up on. And I hope that we do, that the State Library and Office of Public Instruction do work on that, because if we could prove that libraries are having a salubrious effect on reading, that may not be fulfillment or happiness or success or something like that, but that's something that's actually palpable. I think that is really interesting. So that's what I took away from this. But I guess the last thing I took away from our meeting was that until the Office of Public Instruction can commit to this pilot project, and until we're able to find more support for other types of libraries as well, that maybe the moratorium should be continued until staff feels like that they can do this, because I don't think it's responsible for us to take and do this on the backs of existing staff, or do anything to degrade services to existing shared catalog libraries. But I think it's important that we do open things back up just as soon as we can, and I would like that to be reflected somehow in the minutes, at least my opinion, and that we should quickly find the resources so that we can do that. The promise of the shared catalog has always been, you don't have to be a member, but if you are a member, everyone's welcome. If you want to be a member, everyone's welcome, and we'll help you do it. We've kind of reached the end of our resource ability to help people do it. We need to fix that so we can continue on with that promise. And I think we should have this an agenda item every commission meeting to see where we are with this process.
I think it's just critical.
How many libraries are in the queue that are waiting?
It varies. We know that there is at least one public library that is very, very interested in joining. And usually we get a couple of schools every year. And I think I'd like to just go on the record as saying we want to add libraries. This was a really hard decision. And in fact, I went against staff because they were like, oh no, we can do this. And I was like, at some point we need to say enough is enough. And maybe it's my consultant background and having spent too many times telling public library directors and boards, stop saying yes when you don't have the resources. And I just felt like I said, this was the only variable I could control and that we needed to find the resources. But we want to add libraries. If you want to join the MSC, we want you to be there. But we also want you to be able to provide the best service possible to your people, and we want to be able to provide the best service possible to you and your libraries. So
and what's the count now? How many?
180 libraries.
And Tracy, we still haven't added Lewis and Clark County yet, right?
They're going live in May.
Mm-hmm. So I think that was part of your decision, is that because they were waiting so long in the year, and it's a big library system, that that was part of the reason to create that moratorium.
Yes, they're very complicated.
So you must have thought about what your ask might be to the commission for more resources. How much more do you need to do this?
Oh, yes, I have thought about that.
Wow, I'm amazed.
So, I think a system admin with salary and benefits and operations and so forth, you're looking at up to about 80,000. We asked Kara Orban to step up and be the Montana Shared Catalog Director in addition to her other duties, and we shifted some things around. Quite frankly, that was a huge lift to ask of her. So I really think that the Shared Catalog would benefit from a dedicated MSC director, which would be another, in that basically 150,000 range. And then there are some things that the Shared Catalog would like to do and pursue that they think would be of real relevance to Montanans. So I think I kind of told Jenny, in theory, we might get 300,000 in extra LSTA funds. And you could probably spend all of it on the Shared Catalog pretty effectively. I don't know that we want to do that, and I don't want to make that decision here. But I think to really have the Shared Catalog be the utility that libraries use so people can get the stuff, you have to invest in it. And that's what it would take.
So an immediate ask of 150, 200?
150 would be great. That's not what I'm asking for. It's for attending parts.
Well, let's see. Everyone get out your wallets.
More money in your than mine.
And so, speaking of arts, as we look forward, and if schools are one of our biggest add-ons every year, would that potentially be something you would suggest to for OPI to build into its future planning, to have a little more support for those school libraries?
Of course, because school libraries and community libraries affect students. And I'm looking at more of a generational look of reading skills, but metrics. If we're going to go forward with a sustainable ask to the legislature, we have to have data. And I do have some data that is on our readings course, and I can do interim, I can do longitudinal data, and that's something that we need to look at to make sure that whatever we start, we can finish by 21. And so thank you for being patient with that. And also, when the legislature has finished this budget cycle, and we know what we have, then I can be a little bit more aggressive with whatever dollar figure there might be attributed to that. But it's partnerships, and I believe in partnerships. In fact, it will bring up our communities, bring up our schools, and most importantly, our students. So I think reading is the way to go.
I'm really eager to see how that pans out. I think that's really cool.
And we discussed multiple ideas on who we might impact across the state to get some readily data in the next 18 months, if indeed we do embark on this.
So any other questions or comments for either Tracy or Elsie?
I don't know if this really relates, but just from a public awareness point of view, we had at the JS Conference last week a lot of discussion about the Census 2020 and the move to, more reliance on digital submission of that. And we talked a bit at that conference about the libraries, digital role in that, the local libraries, because they are the safety net and really the means for some people to be able to, for instance, participate in the census. And that's also where lowering the number of people that are going out, physically to do the direct census and ask people to do it is the resources are lower. They're connected with people doing it for the first time. So it's more of a public awareness thing that doesn't want to apply to the schools as much as the public libraries.
But we rely on census data.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I can speak a little more about what the state library is doing with regard to the census, but I guess I would make a few points. I agree with Bruce. It's right for us to continue to bring this topic to the commission to give you a regular update until the situation is resolved, because this is one of our important programs, and we know that we have libraries waiting for this situation to be resolved. So we need to signal to them so they have their ability to plan based on our resources and our decision making. And I'm so grateful for the conversations we've had with OPI. In my experience working with OPI, certainly this has been the most engagement we've had on these really critical resource questions. And so I so appreciate that. And I think we can come to some positive options here in the very near future. We're talking about doing a look back at the existing school libraries. I think we said there's 68 in the shared catalog right now. Looking back at the reading scores that Superintendent Artson can provide to see if there's some kind of corollary data that we can point to an impact on reading scores for those libraries that have joined the shared catalog, so that we can then help plan efficiently for adding new libraries in an interim period, and then have some good data that we can share with some inter-legislative committees and then ahead of a potential executive planning process request for 2021. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. I also want to say that I recognize that the commission and the staff have some really challenging decisions to make as we plan to rebuild for the future. And you'll recall when we were going through the budget cuts, we said that we wanted to position ourselves to build for the future. And you also challenged us to think about making sure that we have the resources necessary to do what we can well, and to say no where we don't have those resources. And I think that's what we're doing. I agree with Tracy. We'd be making a misstep if we continue to take on new responsibilities without having those resources. We're going to talk in a little while about some of those additional resources that are coming back to the state library, and how we need to focus on making sure that we are whole in the areas where we're not currently whole before taking on those kinds of new responsibilities. And I think this is the same line of thinking and reasoning that we need to be prepared for as we look to the next year or so as we come out of the 2019 legislative session.
Well, I look forward to hearing from staff at the next meeting about this topic, perhaps with if some of the anticipated changes in terms of our fiscal situation come about, and if in fact we get more LSTA monies, understanding that those are not monies available for quite some time because of the federal cycle. It would be interesting to know why we wouldn't, and I acknowledge that it may be a bad idea, but why we wouldn't include some of those resources from one of those sources in supporting the continued growth of the shared catalog. And I would be fully willing to listen to reasons why not. But it seems to me it's so important that we need to be looking under every rock for money to do this.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And I just think this really, we'll talk about it more later on in the agenda, but it really brings up the need for having the finance committee established, so. All right, we're gonna jump back up to Melissa, the third quarter financial report.
So if you want to follow along, I'll just go through my handout, the first couple of pages at least. We just finished third quarter of FY19, so we are officially 75% of the way through the year. And you can see by my first note that we have spent 59% of our appropriations. So we are right in line and where we want to be as far as our expenditures are. I also want to make a note that I mentioned last time we were awarded the 2019 LSTA grant, and we have now started drawing down on that to cover Talking Book library expenditures. So everything's going according to plan with our 2019 grant. The colorful box at the bottom just shows our progress made on the trust projects that you all approved. And out of the $450,000 that's been approved for various projects, we've spent almost $240,000. We will be receiving our last invoice from Panic for the public relations campaign, so we'll be wrapping that up, and we've almost expended the entire amount that was approved. And on the next page, are the charts that show the cash balances for two of our very important accounts. The first is the trust balance that's held at the Board of Investments. You can see that the trend over the last couple of years, it started really high. We started this chart right at the time that the large donation was made. And there's just been a sort of gradual downward trend in the balance there, which reflects us spending the dollars that were approved for those projects. And then the second chart shows our land information account balance. This is a combination of the cash account that's held at the state as well as the fund that's held at the Board of Investments. I do want to make one note that the December 18 balance was a little bit off because I didn't include an accrual that had happened, a reversal of an accrual that happened, so just wanted to make a note that that's been fixed. It didn't significantly change the balance that was reported, and you can see that there's a slight uptick over the last quarter in the balance in that fund. On the next page is the financial statement for the agency as a whole. You can see that 67% of our personal services have been expended. I feel really good about that because we are 75% of the way through the year. This is a hard part of the budget to manage because there are so many things that happen that are unexpected. But where we are, I feel really comfortable that we'll come in right in line with our appropriations when we get to the end of the year. Similarly, with our operations expenditures, we're at 64%. There's a lot of timing issues here that we have to manage, a lot of obligations that are paid in full at the beginning of the year and similarly at the end of the year. So we're tracking those closely as we get closer to the end of the year. And everything looks really good. I did want to mention, as far as our funding sources go, we just spent a lot of time talking about coal and how that will be something that we need to talk a lot about in the future. As far as this year goes, the cash that has been received in our state library coal account is right in line with what we were appropriated. So we have appropriation, but we can't spend it unless there's cash there. So far we have $174,000 left in appropriation for that fund, and the cash balance in that fund is $162,000. So I feel very comfortable that over the next quarter we will have more than enough cash to be able to spend that appropriation, and it looks like a little bit extra so that there will be more cash buildup into the
Carryover.
next year. Because as you all saw in Chris's presentation, the percentage of funding that will be deposited into our account will increase over the next biennium. So everything looks pretty good there. I'm looking forward to having a conversation about the Finance Committee. I'm really excited about that and about the opportunity to go into more detail about a lot of the work that I do. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
I have a question.
Sure.
Back up top in the first chart, the MSL trust balance.
Yes.
This is different than the trust for Montana Library.
Yes.
That MSL trust is just current use cash. It's not an endowment.
No.
Can it be put into an endowment?
It has to stay in that account. It's something that's established by state law.
Well, in that account, but can it be changed from just cash to something that a principal that will earn interest?
I don't believe so. It's in a STIP account, so it does earn a little bit of interest, but it's minimal. And it's something that really bothers me too, because it could be earning 7 to 8%. I think that we're limited by statute on that. And I will double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that this is what the statute
You're
says.
exactly right. And when we got that major donation a couple of years ago, we did ask the Attorney General's office if we had options for investing it, and they said no, that it has to be invested with the Board of Investments through this account.
And what does that earn?
It's short-term overnight, so it's like less than, it's a few percent maybe.
2 to 3 has been good. It's come back up a little bit in the last couple of years. It was less than 2 for a while. And it's come back up.
But this is one of the main reasons that the drivers behind the Trust for Montana Libraries, to give us a little bit more flexibility. So we'd have, this would almost become like a, just sort of money in the bank account on that would kind of form a certain, it'd be very constant. But, we could also, if we chose to, if the trust chose to, invest more aggressively in other kinds of sources and get the benefit of that. So in 20 years from now, this might be less of an issue. It's just, we got to make it over these 20 years.
So I personally feel comfortable spending out the funding in the trust. It is a commission policy regarding how the funds are spent. That policy said it's for special projects as opposed to ongoing operations. But it isn't earning a lot of interest, so it doesn't do us a lot of good just sitting there, and we have a lot of opportunities to spend it on different things. If we did have different investment options, I might recommend differently.
Yeah, $2 million would fund that $80,000 systems position.
Exactly.
If it were an endowment.
So let's build the Trust for Montana Libraries ASAP. What are we waiting for?
Pull out your wallet again, Bruce.
Yeah, that won't quite do it.
So we do have to take action on the third quarter financial report.
I move acceptance.
Second.
Thank you, Julie and Bruce. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is passed. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sheena. We had a good discussion. It's got more to happen though, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to check in with you guys. Does anyone need a comfort break?
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'm gonna post my door.
Everyone's okay, we'll keep going.
Well, just while you ask about breaks,
Stay on the road.
we should take a break around 11:45 noon to go out and get our lunches.
Glad you clarified that, because the agenda says we have lunch from time to
Time
time.
to time. No promises.
Marlis wanted us just to be able to go in and out at will.
All right, so we're gonna head back up to the legislative update.
Ross posted the legislative update that I shared yesterday, and there's already one change. Senate Bill 349, which is a bill we haven't talked about yet, that would restrict how people use data from FWP, was tabled in committee yesterday. So that bill is likely dead at this point. However, the legislature wants to study that issue. Just a few other things that I'll note, and staff, I know we're watching the session as it's going on today. There could be changes as we're meeting here. I feel good about where we are from our budget perspective. As you know, the legislature has adopted all of the governor's statewide present law adjustments, and so the funding that the governor suggested is approved at this point. And then in Senate Finance Committee in late March, they added an additional $100,000 the first year and $150,000 in the second year, so $250,000 over the biennium. In operations, those funds were taken from the Consumer Protection account in the Department of Justice. They had a balance in that account, and so some of those funds have been swept for a variety of purposes, including this purpose. There have been a number of amendments related to this action, so I don't know exactly how it's going to flow, if it's going to flow through the general fund into a state special revenue account, is what it sounds like. But that's the source of the funds. They are one-time only, with the idea that through the study mandated in House Bill 633 that the legislature will study different kinds of revenue options. This $250,000 is intended to be a little bit of a bump and a stopgap measure between this biennium and next biennium, when hopefully actual legislation will come out of that study to give the state library more ongoing revenue. So again, it's more than we had hoped for going into the legislative session. There had been talk about maybe a little bit more. That might still happen, but at this point, I think our budget is probably pretty well set where it's going to be. And then House Bill 633 did pass unanimously out of Senate Finance and Claims. It passed unanimously out of the Senate, and it's on its way to the governor's office for signature. And Aaron sent the governor a letter and CC'd the governor's budget director and the education policy advisor on behalf of the commission, urging his signature on House Bill 633. This wasn't an executive bill, it was a legislative bill. So we want to make sure that the governor knows that we support the legislation. Director Tubbs from DNRC was at the hearing in Senate Finance and Claims as a proponent to the bill, so that certainly signals the executive support of the legislation. So I believe he will sign, but we don't want to take any chances. The Montana Library Association also sent him a communication urging his signature on that piece of legislation. There's a number of other bills that we've been tracking. House Bill 150, the Next Generation 911 Cleanup Bill, passed unanimously and is headed to the governor for his signature. Skipped over House Bill 14, which was the infrastructure bill. That bill has been tabled, but a modified version of the infrastructure bill carried under House Bill 652 is moving forward. It has less funding in the bonding program, but a number of the initiatives, including the infrastructure bill, including Romney Holler, carried in that piece of legislation. They had a hearing, it passed the House, there was a hearing in Senate Finance and Claims, but as of yesterday, the committee hadn't taken executive action. I imagine that'll happen in the near future as they reach the end of the session. There was a state pay plan approved, and that's been signed by the governor, so we'll have raises for state employees, 50 cents an hour, January 1st of each of the next 2 fiscal years, and that bill also includes some increases in the per diem rates that state employees receive for travel.
Finally.
Those per diem rates are in law, and it requires changes to law to increase per diem. And I don't remember what those rates are off the top of my head. It's still deplorably low, even in the new legislation. There is another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 53, that would tie per diem to the federal travel rates. It's not the full federal travel rate. I think it's around 60 or 70% of the federal rates, but at least it's not, wouldn't require legislative change to increase per diem. So that bill is also moving forward. Oh, it failed. Okay.
Such a downer.
At least, I think breakfast is now going to be like $7.50 reimbursement, something like that, as opposed to $5. So you know something. You get 2 cups of coffee.
And 1 piece of toast. Yeah, free toast, yeah.
We talked in your February meeting about House Bill 354. That was a bill that would have banned pornography in schools and libraries and created fines. The Library Association opposed that bill, and I was there as an informational witness. That bill was also tabled in committee. We talked about quickly about Senate Bill 349. As this bill was originally written, it had very broad language that would have given FWP the authority to prevent the distribution of specific point location data for animals that they manage. And our initial concern was that the way the law was written, as one of our data source agencies, they may have had the legal ability to withhold data from us. And so we worked with Senator Konauer, the bill sponsor, to make sure that there was an exception for the state library. That original version of the bill was tabled, came back in a different form that attempted to tie data restrictions to the state's public information laws. Under the state constitution, of course, Montanans have broad access to public information, with the exception of information about individual privacy. Individual privacy is the only type of information that's protected under law. And again, the Senate Bill 349 attempted to tie.
Emergency alert.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it's a test. Everybody's going to get it.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, it's just a test.
Seems to work.
So what the bill attempted to do was to tie withholding species information to restrictions under the public information law. And the Montana Newspaper Association got up and opposed that and made the case that the exemptions really are only for individual privacy, and protecting information about animals doesn't rise to the level of individual privacy. And so the bill was amended in the Senate to, instead of giving FWP the permission to restrict access to data, penalize people who misuse the data. And the primary concern of the sponsor is that people may misuse point location data for particular species or unfair chase in hunting. So that bill moved out of the Senate. Like I said, it was tabled in the House yesterday, but there will be a study about this issue if that's approved by the legislature. So something that we'll be watching for and working with FWP to ensure that we're still able to have access to the information we need to do our work. And then lastly, the State Library and the Library Association were proponents on Senate Bill 355, which was carried by Senator Bryce Bennett out of Missoula. It was a bill that would have mandated net neutrality in the state of Montana for internet service providers. It was opposed by the Montana Telecommunications Association and some of the other larger ISPs that serve the state, and it was pretty promptly tabled by the Senate Energy and Telecommunications Committee. But something I think we'll see again in future legislative sessions.
When are the when's the House and Senate going home?
No later than May 1st.
When do you think they're going home?
Well, the rumors are flying.
That's why I asked.
So, not today. The House hasn't approved House Bill 2 yet, so that's the big question. They'll have to take up House Bill 2 and consider the Senate's amendments. If they accept them, it could be sooner. If they don't, then it'll go to conference committee and it could be around a little bit longer. People are talking about maybe next week ahead of the Easter break that they could be done. We heard as earlier that they could be done as early as today, but their work is not done on the budget, so that's not going to.
Given some of the unuseful things that happened late in last session.
Yes, exactly. Nobody's holding their breath at this point. Yeah. But we've heard, just as I said, really, really positive support from a number of legislative champions, including Lou Jones, Nancy Valance. So I think their commitment to studying the issue of the revenue for the state library is sincere. Their focus has been on general fund, but we'll certainly talk about coal severance tax funding and the volatility there when we have the opportunity to participate in the study. If you're not familiar with interim studies, you'll see lots of House and Senate resolution bills coming out now for various studies, and some of those bills are approved and some are not. And then the legislature actually ranks those study resolutions, and depending on the resources they have available, will conduct the top 10 studies or something like that. So in that process, there's not a guarantee that even if a resolution is passed by the legislature, that the study will actually occur, which is why in House Bill 633, it was amended to mandate that this study occur rather than being a separate bill as a resolution. So with this bill passage and the governor's signature, the Legislative Finance Committee will have to conduct this study. So lots of work coming up. The other thing I wanted to mention about the study itself, though, is that we spent a lot of time over the interim talking about how we evaluate different types of revenue options that could come forward. We talked about different kinds of filing fees, for example. We talked about bed tax options, some of those kinds of things, and thinking about the strategic triangle and what makes sense for our legitimizers, i.e. the legislature, and our stakeholders. And I think all of that work positions us really well to think very deliberately about the different kinds of revenue options that could be proposed in this kind of study, and to hopefully make some wise recommendations to the Legislative Finance Committee that can be carried forward in legislation next session.
Are there any solutions in that, or potential for local government passing?
Maybe. I think we have to find the revenue for them.
Yeah.
Any other legislative questions?
All right, hearing none, we will move forward to the limited English proficiency policy.
Yes, so you will remember at your last meeting, we introduced this memo draft. And as a reminder, this is a policy that the Institute of Museum and Library Services advised we put in place to recognize the possibility that Montana residents with limited English proficiency may have difficulty taking advantage of our federally funded library services, and that we ought to have a policy in place to address those needs on a case-by-case basis. We also included some resources for libraries in the event that they should need some assistance developing those resources.
So I just had a question, came to me just now, but would there be maybe in federations just informing librarians that this is out there? Because if people don't know that it's something they can take advantage of. You know?
Right. That is a great point. Thank put that on the agenda for consideration.
We look at this last meeting. I move adoption as per the draft.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, motion passes. So we're down to the Network Advisory Council report.
So I believe later on in your agenda, you'll be discussing probably the issue the Network Advisory Council spent the most time on, which was the Fair Library Access Resolution. That was a very good conversation and pretty inspiring, and I thought they had some really good feedback for you on just kind of how to make that resolution more robust and reflect some of the realities that they're seeing in their own libraries. In addition, the Network Advisory Council took a look at the FY19 LSTA award, and we're just going to kind of do this in two parts. They basically approved the standing expenses that we have, and then I'll go back to them in May with a proposal for the spending of some unallocated, mostly coal tax funds. So you will see the FY19 LSTA LDD budget at your June meeting per our normal process. And then just a few other things that the Network Advisory Council talked about. They talked about the Digital Public Library of America ebook pilot project that we're exploring, and just what they defined as success, which was pretty standard and very much driven by the experience of the end user, and whether or not this actually gave the end user access to more content, whether it was user-friendly, and whether or not it actually helped reduce the problem with Montana Library to Go. And just Montana Library to Go has been a victim of its own success, and it has huge hold queues. And so the hope is that this project might also help ease that pain and that burden as well. Then the Network Advisory Council talked about our OCLC contract. We have had for many, many years, probably 20 plus, looking at Bruce, 20 plus years, the statewide contract with OCLC, which is, for those of you who might be new to the library world, it's like the library's Microsoft Office suite. It allows libraries to basically share out their materials. But times have changed, and with the addition of things like the partner sharing group, libraries are sharing materials differently, and they're not using the OCLC services in the same way. And so Kara and I kind of talked to the Network Advisory Council about their own experiences, and they encouraged Kara to go forward to talk to OCLC about possibly negotiating a different contract, because we think libraries and the state library as part of the, as someone who puts money into the pool, we're actually probably paying for more services than we're using right now. So Kara is going to pursue that. We are in our last year of a 3-year contract that we negotiated with them. We're going to go ahead and renew. So we don't want anyone to lose anything. It's just we think the money can be used in smarter ways.
Can you just say quickly what those services are in the OCLC contract?
What we're doing, so currently everybody has interlibrary loan. They have, I think everybody has access to original cataloging, but not everybody chooses to use it. Everybody has copy cataloging. We also have access to First Search WorldCat, so the front end that patrons use to see it. Am I missing anything, Kara? No, that's pretty much. Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Are you using it for security?
For security?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Were you using any of the encryption stuff?
I don't think so.
Or any of those backroom stuff? No.
No backroom stuff. So, well, interlibrary loan and cataloging is kind of backroom.
And what advantage does the First Search interface bring over worldcat.org?
That's a great question. I would defer to libraries that are actively using First Search, and there are a few that is one area that we've targeted because we know that it's not as well used as it has in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure yet why they continue to use it.
Power users can use First Search to more seamlessly request interlibrary loans from the library. There aren't
those 3 power users.
yeah. But yeah, and that's where we're at. So that's why we're looking at this contract.
Thank you.
Yep. And then the last two things I will mention that the Network Advisory Council covered was we had an update from Pamela Benjamin, who's the Trails Coordinator, just kind of talking about trails, its history, what it's doing, where it's going. And then finally, I asked the Network Advisory Council for assistance in setting priorities for our lifelong learning librarian. You know, when you think about birth to the end of life, that is like a really huge scope of time. And I don't want Amelia to burn out, and I want her to be able to do good work. And so I was asking the Network Advisory Council, you know, what are the challenges you're seeing in your communities? What are the opportunities? You know, what kind of focus can we give to lifelong learning so that Amelia can do that work and do a good job and libraries get good service? And it was pretty interesting because we found that there were a lot of problems that cross all types of libraries, things like patrons experiencing homelessness and patrons experiencing drug addiction and so forth. It didn't really matter what type of library, they all mentioned that that is a challenge that they are having to deal with. And so that kind of helped us give some focus, and we're going to try to find out in a little bit more detail what libraries need and go from there. Any questions from you?
Who serves on the Network Advisory Council, and are there terms?
Yes, yeah. So we try to get geographic representation, so across the state, and we also try to make sure that we have all types of libraries represented. So we have, and we even have like large public libraries, medium public libraries, small public libraries. We have a representative from the commission, from the Montana Shared Catalog, from Trails. We have all of the large academics represented. And then we have a large school library rep and a small school rep. Most members have a 3-year term, but representatives like the Commission and the Montana Shared Catalog and the academic libraries don't have those term limits. They're just kind of appointed or recommended by others.
And how often does it meet?
4 times a year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who's the commission representative? Oh, this commission, sorry.
There is
Not
no
the commissioner pirate.
Your representative missed the last meeting, for which he's sorry. He was unavailable.
Yes.
Yeah, he acts like he's tired or something.
Sounds like you're really sad you missed it.
Well, I actually am sad I missed it, but you can't have your cake and eat it too.
And you were eating pie as well.
I was eating pie.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy.
For me? So, have you had any problems recruiting members recently? No?
No, we have not. In fact, this last one, Jenny and I had a really hard time deciding. Jenny does appoint the members. She makes the final decision.
I think it's worth noting that in the past, that the NAC or something like it has been around for quite a while and has provided the State Library Commission and staff secondarily guidance for years. And there have been times when the Network Advisory Council probably was the engine that drove library progress forward in Montana, in that it's at times been more dynamic than at other times. But that from what I can see, and I'd be curious to know what one of the citizens in the audience would think about this. From what I can see, that it's really an important part of connecting us and also taking and giving us our marching orders generally.
It's an important group, especially because it spreads across the whole state. Even more so than the commission, although that tries to happen there too, but you can't do it with 7 people. And like she says, the representation is good. So it's always been an important piece of the state library.
It's kind of like the stronger the commission, the stronger the NAC, the better the state library. Not in terms of competition with staff or anything, but just you want rock and roll. You want dynamic. I can't say it.
It's okay.
You did.
Working with accreditation at the college, I feel like we've constantly, it's like shared governance, giving the librarians a chance to say, this is what we want, instead of us guessing. And I think that's so important. And it is a very hardworking group. I've been impressed with it for a very long time, so I'm very thankful for the NAC.
Me too.
looking at my skip arounds. So you are next. The public library standard exemption request.
Okay. So Chuck and I were getting ready for opening the public library standards, which happens in early May. And the public libraries, of course, need to confirm whether or not they meet these standards or request a deferral from the state librarian. As we were doing that, I realized that there was a standard that the public libraries can't really meet, and it's our fault, my fault. We, due to the loss of staff through the budget cuts and actually a retiring staff member, we lost all the knowledge of how our internal in-house system worked, and so we were not able to serve out the statistics reports. I've been able to give libraries raw data and a spreadsheet, and some have asked for that, but they can't use the Montana Public Library statistical report. It's not available for them. And so I brought this to Jenny's attention. We asked Jeff Dowd for advice on how to handle this. And we would like to request that the commission grant an automatic deferral for these libraries, since it is not their fault. And I am happy to report we just signed a contract and paid the invoice for Bibliostat Collect and Connect, so the libraries will have those statistical reports, and also will be able to use that to clean up their statistics. So we will solve this problem next year. Any questions for me?
Not a question, just a comment. I mean, this is a constant problem for all of us, right? How do we retain institutional knowledge when people leave or retire? Or, I have a colleague who used to call them truck files. You need to have truck files in case you get hit by a truck, right? Somebody knows what you were doing. And I don't. It's hard to solve that.
Did we gather data from last year from public libraries?
Yes, we have the data.
So when Bibliostat gets populated, those data will be represented?
Yes.
There won't be a gap?
Exactly.
Will not be a gap?
As part of the contract, I said a feature I wanted was all historical stats. We're going to upload all of them from all the years.
I move that we approve the exemption, and Tracy, don't be so hard on yourself. And that's a part of my motion, too.
Thank you, Jenny and Kenny. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion passes.
You work damn hard already.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
All right, so we're going to move forward with the collection development policy memo.
She's here. So we presented the collection development policy draft at the last meeting, and that's about it.
One minor thing in the collection development policy that would keep it from being a clean, just adoption. The first full sentence on the 7th page. The last sentence of the first full paragraph of the 7th page. We just have note in there. We're going to add the Braille contract as an appendix. So we can do that, but you probably want to include that note in the motion.
All right.
So moved, including the note about Braille.
Second.
Thank you, Jamie and Bruce. Any further discussion?
So is this an appropriate place to say something about accessibility of the collection?
Sure.
I don't see that anywhere. I don't see the word appear in there anywhere.
Is accessibility presumed by something that kind of embraces this and everything, all state library content?
Well, we know that although we strive to make our content as accessible as possible, and much of it, of course, is, especially some of the mapped content and the data, the tools to ensure that they are as accessible as possible or just not as robust. So, that's certainly an issue that we are aware of. I think we're challenged with the technology to make sure that that data is more accessible. But other kinds of content, like our state publications, are very, very accessible. Of course, all of the document library content is accessible. I honestly don't know if we run accessibility checkers on things like our web archive, but I think Kenny's point is how do we make that point in the policy?
I mean, more generally, is there a policy someplace or procedure that says our stuff is available to all Montanans, everybody? I mean, do we have any sort of a general accessibility, or to people at varying? We talked about people of low English capacity, to people with physical impairments that prevent them from doing standard stuff. Do we have a policy that talks about that?
Just the general state accessibility policy that all state agencies fall under. We don't have anything specific.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a little bit at a loss, not because you're wrong to bring this up. To me, it's interesting because part of the discussion of bringing our user services and Talking Book Library together was the simple fact that that would provide more oversight for accessibility of our collection. But since then, I think with all other things, that was forgotten. Not that we forget it in our everyday work, but as far as actually putting it into policy. So I'm just trying to think of if this policy is the right place to put it, or if it should be something separate. I don't necessarily have any objection.
I mean, there is a statement there that says, under our roles, that MSL supports reading for Montanans with visual or physical disabilities. I think this is just a place to put it in a nod. It's not just what you're posting yourself or creating yourself. It's also when you go out and buy collections. Are you asking that question of the vendor? Are these collections accessible to disabled users? So I don't think it has to be anything very sophisticated here, just a statement that says that you will strive to provide accessible collections.
I almost would it be, is it best to put that statement in here or reference the state accessibility policy?
Yeah, that's fine too.
Would it be appropriate to act on the motion as it is and have staff bring to us at our next meeting an amendment, if appropriate?
I think you can take action suggesting the amendment, and then we would just bring you the revised version reflecting your action at the June meeting.
Well, we'd have to vote against the motion, right? That has been seconded. Is that correct?
We could make an amendment.
You can make a friendly amendment to the motion.
I would make that amendment that staff brings back a considered opinion about whether we should add something, and if so, what that would be.
I just want to make sure I'm clear on commission intent, and I liked Kenny's language about having collections that strive to be accessible, because we talk about accessibility with Esri, for example, and we recognize that there are deficiencies in the tools that are available.
And to your point, we could do both. We could use your language, go ahead and put that in here, and then explore whether or not something else needs to be done, and come back to our research on that.
There's also in the Library Bill of Rights, could be added in that section, which would be all encompassing.
It's tricky because of licensing issues and practical things like that as well.
Why is that tricky?
Well, if the state library were to acquire a database, for instance, of local governmental appropriate stuff for state library or local governments, but wasn't able to license it for all million people in Montana, but just for a certain thing, if it was required that it be available to every Montanan, that license wouldn't be possible.
I like the idea of the language that Kenning suggested
as opposed to some kind of in accordance with state policy. Because if you put in accordance with state policy in one policy, it makes it sound like all the policies aren't in accordance with state policy.
And then if those state policies change, then
That's a little bit of my hesitation about putting in here at all.
Right.
Because shouldn't everything we do be towards?
And that's why I asked about a general policy about access, maybe as a standalone. And if you came back to us with that, that would make sense to me. Then it could be really simple and self-contained, and other stuff would just refer to it, unless accepted.
Sorry, I didn't mean for this to become so complicated. I just think that, this is a policy about collections, right? And I'm just interested in making sure that the collections, i.e. the information that the state library puts out, is as accessible as it can be. Don't need to strive for perfection.
yes.
Is it mandatory that we pass this resolution today?
No.
Would it be more convenient for staff if it was passed today and then amended?
Preference.
So can we table this and with a request for an amendment before we take action?
Or not?
Yeah.
Do you need a motion?
To table?
Well, a motion to modify the motion that's on the table.
We can withdraw his motion. We can withdraw a motion.
Wait,
Just withdraw the motion.
can I try to rescue this? I would prefer to just, I'll make a friendly amendment to my own emotion, to my own motion, not the emotion. That the state library staff just add a sentence that states something to the effect of the state library will strive to create and purchase collections that are accessible to to disabled users. Will that work?
Yeah.
Because I think we can pass this today with just that slight amendment.
Disabled or all
And
users?
people first wording.
I think disabled users need to be specifically called out in this. I don't think.
So I'm a little fuzzy with procedure. Do we have to withdraw Bruce's amendment?
I would withdraw my amendment.
Okay, any other discussion? Do we need a second on Kenny's amendment? Okay, we do need a second.
I would second Kenning's.
Thank you, Bruce. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of accepting the policy with the amendment about accessibility, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, guys. Good conversation.
So we'll make sure we bring you the revised version at your next meeting so that you can have it for your record.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. We have enough time for Michael Fashway to.
She's right behind.
Okay. Okay. Next generation 911.
I was going to bring up a couple things on the screen. I don't know if that's one of them or not. So I believe the Next Gen GIS Data Assessment Project has been an ongoing item in the commission reports for a while now. So I won't go into the background of that too much, but if you have questions, feel free to interrupt at any time if I'm kind of glossing over something that doesn't make sense. From a project perspective, I got started last summer. The contract was awarded to Digital Data Technologies out of Columbus, Ohio. As part of that contract, DDTI was responsible for coordinating and acquiring all the local government data sets used as part of the assessment, as well as helping the local governments acquire the 911 data sets that are part of this, that are typically managed and or housed by CenturyLink statewide. Just some clarification on it a little bit. The assessments that were done as part of this project were all strictly focused on individual PSAPs. So it was looking at just the data within specific PSAP. So PSAP is a public safety answering point. It's the 911 call center where 911 calls are answered. Typically, they mostly correspond with counties. There are a few PSAPs, maybe half dozen in the state, that are some different conglomeration of either counties and or county cities. The reason I point that out is with the GIS data and everything, we're used to operating on a statewide scale. So by analyzing and assessing the data just individually within each county or PSAP, you're missing certain aspects of data quality and things that are important. But as far as this project could reasonably get at as a first round, it was kind of difficult to take it to that next level of doing a true kind of statewide data analysis. So we weren't looking too much in between different PSAPs data sets and looking for issues there. As part of the process, when DDTI finished an assessment for a county, they would send the assessment, the report, and the corresponding data sets to me to review prior to them actually sending them to each county. In the end, 50 out of the 52 identified PSAPs in the state participated in the assessment project. All the county PSAPs participated in the end. 2 of the 3 tribal PSAPs were the ones that didn't. Going into the project, there was some speculation or concern about what the participation rate would be. So the fact that we got all the counties and one of the tribes to participate, I think, is a great success, and a lot of that is due to DDTI's work and outreach to the counties. And a note, DDTI was a great partner. They did a lot of the brute force of the project with very little ask of me as the kind of the project manager. And even one of the last county that came in actually came in after the official contract ended, and DDTI was willing to just pick up and run that assessment beyond the contract just to finish it up for us. So, I was really pleased with that. Some high-level observations. I'll try to kind of keep this high level. This was actually written for GIS folks, but there are a number of required data sets when it comes to Next Gen 911, one of them being those PSAP boundaries as a primary required layer for Next Gen 911. Most of the PSAPs don't have that layer, so it's kind of a priority for developing before anything can happen. There are a number of other minimum required attributes within the GIS data. A number of counties have any number of those missing, or they aren't standardized, or in the case of community names, they're kind of using arbitrary community names and things that can cause issues. The 2 final bullets at the bottom are the main points. So when this data is eventually used within a next generation 911 system, it all has to adhere to and easily be shareable to a next generation 911 GIS data model standard put out by NEMA, which is kind of the standards making organization for 911. Very few of the county's data sets would easily be shareable or formatted to that data currently. So that's a kind of a major step for a lot of counties, is to get that data ready for that. And the biggest sort of benchmark that we look at when assessing whether the GIS data is ready for next gen 911 is this recommended 98% match rate between those GIS data sets and the 911 data sets that are databases, tabular databases that are currently used for call routing. Virtually none of the PSAPs met the 98% match. Oops.
It's that. It's not you.
Let me see if I can pull this up. So this is a quick ArcGIS online dashboard. It's got a small database behind it. So getting at that 98% match rate, two of the primary metrics that they use is looking at the tabular version of a road centerline database and how well that matches actual GIS road centerline. So it's the MSAG, is what they call that in RCL, is just short for road centerline. That match rate, only one county in the state exceeded a 98% match rate, and overall the average was about 49% match. The second kind of major metric is looking at the ALLY, which is basically a table of phone company customer addresses, and trying to match that to actually known address points, GIS address point data set. Only 4 counties exceeded that 98% match rate on that, and the statewide average was about 60%. You can see from the map kind of the distribution, red being lower match rates and the dark green being the highest match rates of over 98%. That's a long way of saying that there's a significant amount of work statewide to get GIS data ready for next gen 911. And the counties, it's safe to say a lot of the counties will have to figure out different ways to get things done than they're currently doing. So discussions within the 911 Advisory Council and the 911 community, as well as the GIS community, are sort of really starting to kind of pick up on this issue and trying to talk about different ways to get it done. So.
What is the state library's role in closing those gaps?
I kind of wanted to make a comment about this that ties to your question, and that is, the point of this map isn't to shame PSAPs or counties about where they are. The purpose of this was to get some good baseline data. In 2017, more than $5 million was committed to Next Gen 911. Only 80,000 of that went towards data improvement, and that is this project to do the assessment. So our hope is that now that we have this data, as they're developing a plan for 911 in the future, that this will make a compelling case to get funding for the GIS portion of that. Whether that comes to the library, goes to the PSAPs, that's not our primary concern. Our concern is to make people aware that funding is needed to make this happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. So part of the legislation that funded this also funded a statewide 911 planning effort, which to my knowledge is the first time Montana has ever undergone that. And one of our primary drivers was making sure this data was available as part of that planning effort to make sure that GIS was included as part of that picture. For quite a while previous to this, GIS was kind of considered a sort of a sideshow to 911.
So do I understand correctly that the state library's role is limited to just being keepers of the data, or is there some sort of more leadership role that we need to play?
Well, we're taking a leadership role in trying to help educate and coordinate the PSAPs a little bit. as of right now, beyond our typical Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure stewardship duties, which correspond a lot with these data layers that will be used within 911. Beyond that typical coordination and stewardship that we do, we don't have any official role within 911, although Jenny is now a member of the 911 Advisory Council, so they're increasingly looking at the library and us to provide them the expert knowledge on the GIS side of things.
So if our responsibility, now this will be my last question, I'll shut up and let other people ask questions. But with possibly increased responsibilities, are we getting increased resources to take and fulfill that role?
No, so all my time spent coordinating, working on all this was not funded. So the $80,000 went basically strictly towards DBTI, the contract. There was several pieces of kind of draft legislation this time around that included some ongoing funding for 2 bienniums, I think, to the library to kind of continue some of this and do some more ongoing assessment to help the PSAPs. Unfortunately, they were kind of tied to bills that weren't palatable overall to the PSAPs, so they didn't really go anywhere, although everything we heard, there was strong support from the PSAPs and the local governments for at least our little portion of that for the funding. I think Jenny made the argument several times as that legislation was being discussed that while we love to play an increased role and see it as important, we just don't have the resources to kind of continue a lot of this work without additional funding. So.
I guess what I would just add there is, moving forward, we see a big part of our role, particularly when it's addressing. We already do a lot of data standardization. We naturally, because of the importance for addresses for Next Gen 911, see the Next Gen data model as what we want standardization to, and working to make sure that we're getting data that is already standardized there. That would fit in with our ongoing role for the address and structured address data theme. But beyond that, we just don't have resources to support this.
If we do the work, it'd be nice to get paid.
Aaron, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to remind the commission that it is a priority in the land plan, and it has been identified as a priority of the grant portion of the land plan as well. And we've been funding grants at the local government and tribal level to expand Next Gen 911 for several years now. So we do take that role as well.
So I'm not supposed to stomp into my sheriff's office and demand that he get this done?
Sure. Well, why not?
So I think one of the things that I have been a little bit disappointed about this session is the Next Generation 911 funding. There was some administrative issues with House Bill 150 that prevented the GIS account from continuing. And then there were 2 other pieces of legislation that would have funded the state library, both an FTE and our ability to provide access to a statewide assessment tool for the PSAPs, very much modeled on how we provide access to different kinds of statewide technologies and consulting services. As Michael said, the policies around those pieces of legislation amongst stakeholders prevented those bills from ever actually moving forward. But the piece that everybody agreed to was the importance of the GIS role, and every stakeholder talked about wanting to see that funded. I've continued to get communication from the governor's office as we kind of reach the last days of the session, looking for different vehicles to try to get some funding to the state library for GIS. But again, this is one of those situations where I would say to the commission, we can't take on yet another new responsibility if we don't get the resources to do that, despite the demand
and the need for the work. There's been, a number of grants that we've funded now, and then the 911 grant program also funded upwards of a dozen grants. But those are all individual projects right now, and we don't have a lot of ability to help them coordinate. Michael's done an outstanding job with this project, and I really think it's to his diligence and his professionalism that we have a high response rate in the assessment. He is just really well regarded in this community.
I love to see the state library involved. It's clearly this is a life and death service to the people of Montana. And I'm also glad that we're seeking other forms of support for it. Because we can't get butter from the stone.
I'd add one other kind of nuance to all this that is just unfortunate, and that is that at the time that we got the funding for this, there was also funding for a statewide 911 plan. And that, by statute, was intended to be done before this session so that planning could go on to the session. I'm not pointing any fingers as far as fault for that. In some ways, it's beneficial that that was delayed because we've been able to do this, and I feel very confident that that plan will get done. It will consider this information, and that will be there before the next session. The unfortunate piece is that it puts us in a gap here funding-wise since these other opportunities didn't come to pass. So that is where we are.
And I guess my final comment on it all, and it kind of gets at what you were saying, Bruce, and Ken, I'm sure can talk ad nauseum about this, but there is just a great need for a high level of coordination with this kind of stuff in Next Gen 911. So somehow, in some way, it's going to have to come together statewide, and it's really just a matter of largely the 911 community, but also to some extent the GIS community, determining who's going to do it and how it's going to be funded. A lot of other states, just write a huge contract for a private vendor to come in and do it. Other states, there is some state agency or state level entity working on it. So it has to happen somehow, and it costs money. It's just figuring out where you want that spent.
I kind of hesitate weighing in on this because I'm too close to it, but a couple other points of context. We're quite likely, Next Gen is not going to get implemented in the next 2 years in Montana. It'd be almost literally impossible for that to happen. And these two layers in particular, the structures and road centerline, are two of our most important, MSTI layers, and we've invested a lot of time and effort over time in that. And it is one of the most frustrating things we've ever gone through as well, not because of the library's role in it, but just because of the circumstances as they've fallen out with, we've done a great job, I think, with MLA grants to advance this, and the state, just due to circumstances, has got, 20 times that much money available for this, but I'm not sure, my own personal opinion, if it's being directed in the most effective way that it could be to get the job done. So we are going to, probably be brought back into this in some way. And one thing I think it's important to realize is that these are this is a local government issue. They're responsible for it. Bottom line, they're definitely responsible for it. They always have been. But it's also a big issue of interoperability. We have all these, 911 centers in Montana are staffed by, often few people. And if 2 people have the flu, they need help from someone else, or, doesn't happen. And so, the coordination role is a big deal. And almost every state this assessment was a one-time only. Every county has to do this many, many times as they work through the process. And so there's a real strong need. We had an excellent panel that Michael and I coordinated with a couple of other states, our neighbor North Dakota and Virginia, at the conference last week. And, it's very clear that you need to get some sort of, checks on this, so that everybody's kind of going through the same process. Not every county does it the same way. So I hope there's some opportunity to get some funding, and I would distinguish between what we need to do to get ready for next gen from what we need to do to maintain it. The maintenance is the part that I'm concerned about, ongoing state library getting sucked into that when it really isn't. It's a local government function. But we have so much expertise that, there may be ways that the counties might want to, or MACO somehow might want to come to work with the expertise more heavily with the state library, bring some resources in, even during the next couple of years, through means that I'm not sure we know what those would be at this point. But hopefully there's an opportunity to work on this, because the 98% is an interesting figure, because that was just in a NETA document as a suggestion that everybody's glommed onto that. But really the goal in this is not 90%, it's 100%. You get there 100% of the time and you save people's lives. So it's also incredibly frustrating to me, because as I've said before, this is one of the biggest opportunities we have to build this bridge with local governments, and we're a long ways from making that happen.
Well, thank you, Michael. Really great. We will break because we have to go stand in line. I'm wondering maybe about half an hour or.
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay, so if we can meet back here.
We'll be eating back here or eating someplace else?
I think back here, as far as I know, I don't know if they have a room set up for lunch. So there are box lunches out here. For those of you who requested lunches through Marlis, did everybody get their tickets?
I have hints. Okay. Everyone else, if you asked me that you were registered, it should be in your registration pack, so if you haven't, you got to do that first.
All right.
Yeah.
Marlis?
I think that's. Oh, good, you just turned 6. Yeah.
Picture. Yeah.